Ladies and gentlemen, worry is often mistaken for responsibility, as if by carrying fear in our minds we are somehow preparing ourselves for what lies ahead. But worry is not preparation, it is captivity. It quietly pulls your thoughts out of the present moment and chains them to either yesterday's regrets or tomorrow's unknowns. And when the mind is no longer where your feet are, peace cannot remain. Many people spend their lives physically present, but spiritually absent, replaying what went wrong or imagining what might go wrong, never realizing that God is only experienced fully in the now. When you worry, something deeper is happening inside you. Your mind begins to rehearse danger, even when none is standing in front of you. Your body listens to those thoughts as if they are facts. Your heart tightens, your breathing shortens, and your spirit grows weary. You may smile on the outside, but inside there is a storm. And yet, most of what we worry about never happens. We suffer not because of reality, but because of the stories we keep telling ourselves about reality. Worry is the mind trying to take the place of God. It is the human attempt to control outcomes that were never meant to be controlled. It whispers, "What if this doesn't work out? What if I lose everything? What if I am not strong enough?" But faith asks a different question. Faith asks, what if God is already ahead of me? What if the very thing you are afraid of is the place where God plans to reveal His power most clearly? The truth is, worry keeps you focused on what you cannot do, while trust shifts your attention to what God can do. And where your attention goes, your life follows. When your attention is fixed on fear, fear grows louder. But when your attention is turned toward God, fear begins to lose its authority. Peace does not come from having all the answers. Peace comes from knowing who holds the answers. Many people believe they will trust God once their circumstances improve. But that is not how faith works. Trust does not come after the storm. It is what carries you through the storm. If you wait for everything to make sense before you let go of worry, you will wait forever. God never asked you to understand everything. He asked you to trust Him with everything. Worry also has a way of convincing us that we are alone. It isolates the heart. It makes you feel as though the weight you carry is yours alone to bear. But the moment you pause, truly pause, and become still, you begin to sense something greater than your fear. In stillness, the noise of anxious thoughts quiets, and the voice of God becomes clearer. Stillness is not inactivity, it is surrender. It is the soul saying, "I will not be ruled by fear today." When you live constantly in the past, you relive old pain that God has already forgiven and healed. When you live constantly in the future, you borrow trouble that does not belong to you. But when you live in the present moment, you stand on holy ground. Right now is where grace is sufficient. Right now is where strength is available. Right now is where God meets you, not yesterday, not tomorrow, but here. There is a freedom that comes when you realize that worry has never solved a single problem. It has never added a day to your life, never healed a relationship, never changed an outcome for the better. All it has ever done is drain your joy and weaken your faith. Trust, on the other hand, strengthens you even before circumstances change. Trust steadies your heart when the ground feels unstable. Trust reminds you that God's power is not limited by what you see. You were not created to live in constant anxiety. You were created to live in confidence. Confidence not in yourself, but in God. When you choose trust over worry, you are not ignoring reality. You are acknowledging a higher reality. You are declaring that no problem is bigger than God, no obstacle too complex, no situation too broken for His intervention. And here is the quiet miracle that happens when you stop worrying and start trusting. Your inner world begins to change. Your thoughts slow down. Your heart softens. Your body releases tension it has been carrying for years. And as you change on the inside, you begin to see life differently on the outside. Doors you never noticed begin to appear. Solutions come with a clarity that fear never allowed. Trust does not mean you will never feel afraid. It means fear will no longer be your master. It means when anxious thoughts arise, you do not build a home for them in your mind. You acknowledge them, and then you hand them over to God, again and again, if necessary. Faith is not a one-time decision. It is a daily posture of the heart. So when worry tries to pull you into tomorrow, gently bring your attention back to today. When it drags you into yesterday, remind yourself that God has already been there. Choose to rest your mind where your body is. Choose to trust that even now, even here, God is at work in ways you cannot yet see. And when you finally let go of worry, you make room for God to do what only He can do. What you believe deep in your heart quietly shapes the life you wake up to every day. Long before circumstances change on the outside, something has already been decided on the inside. Belief is not just an idea you agree with, it is a posture of the soul. It determines how you see, how you respond, and how you endure. Many people say they believe in God, yet live as though the final word belongs to fear, history, or human limitation. But faith is not merely spoken, it is lived, moment by moment, thought by thought. Every repeated belief leaves a mark. When you tell yourself again and again that something is impossible, your heart begins to accept that verdict as truth. Your prayers grow smaller, your expectations shrink. Without realizing it, you begin to prepare for disappointment rather than deliverance. The tragedy is not that God is unwilling to act, but that many hearts are no longer expecting Him to. Belief sets the boundaries of expectation, and expectation quietly shapes experience. The mind is powerful, but it is not meant to be sovereign. When the mind leads without faith, it measures everything by what it can see, calculate, and explain. And what it cannot explain, it fears. But faith introduces the mind to a higher authority. Faith reminds us that God does not work according to human odds. He works according to divine purpose. What looks closed to you may only be waiting for belief to open the door. Belief is not pretending the problem is smaller than it is. Belief is recognizing that God is greater than the problem. It does not deny pain, loss, or uncertainty. It places them in the hands of a God who has never lost control. When belief is rooted in God's power, even weakness becomes a place where strength can appear. Even delay becomes a place where patience is refined. Even impossibility becomes an invitation for God to reveal Himself. Many people unknowingly live trapped by borrowed beliefs. Beliefs handed down by past failures, by voices that once spoke doubt, by experiences that ended in disappointment. Over time, those beliefs become familiar companions. They sound reasonable, they sound protective, but they quietly limit what God can do in a life that was meant to be surrendered, not guarded by fear. God never asked you to protect yourself from hope. He asked you to trust Him with your heart. When belief changes, something shifts inside you. You begin to pray differently, not with desperation, but with expectation. You begin to wait differently, not with anxiety, but with hope. You begin to act differently, not driven by panic, but guided by peace. Faith does not always remove the struggle, but it changes the way you walk through it. You no longer walk alone, and you no longer walk in defeat. There is a sacred power in choosing belief repeatedly, especially when circumstances argue against it. Each time you choose to believe God over fear, you strengthen your spiritual foundation. Each time you refuse to let doubt have the final word, your faith grows deeper roots. Belief, practiced daily, becomes spiritual endurance, and endurance over time produces unshakable trust. Some people wait for a miracle before they believe, but often belief is what allows the miracle to arrive. God responds not to perfection, but to openness. A heart that says, "I don't understand, but I trust you," creates space for divine movement. Faith is not confidence in outcomes. It is confidence in God's character. It rests in who He is, even when the future is unclear. When you believe, you are not ignoring reality, you are seeing beyond it. You are aligning your heart with truth that cannot be measured by circumstance. You are declaring that the story is not finished, that failure is not final, and that God's word is stronger than human conclusions. Belief lifts your eyes from what has been to what could be, and more importantly, to who God is. And there is something else belief does that we often overlook. It changes you before it changes anything else. It reshapes your inner world. It softens hardened places. It restores courage where fear once lived. Over time, belief becomes visible not in loud words, but in quiet strength, steady hope, and a peace that does not depend on results. Others may not understand it, but they will recognize it. They will see a calm that cannot be explained and a confidence that does not come from circumstance. Belief is not a single decision made in a moment of emotion. It is a commitment renewed daily. Some days it feels strong, other days it feels fragile. But even fragile belief, placed in God, is enough. God does not measure faith by its size, but by where it is placed. A trembling trust in His hands is still trust, and He honors it. So guard what you believe. Be careful which thoughts you allow to settle in your heart. Do not let fear write the story of your future. Let faith speak louder. Let hope rise higher. And when doubt comes, as it surely will, do not run from God. Run to Him with honest faith and an open heart. Because when belief is anchored in God, even the impossible begins to lose its power to intimidate. There is a natural instinct in all of us to try to control life, to hold tightly to outcomes, and to plan every step as though our careful calculation could determine what God alone can accomplish. We live as though our efforts alone will secure safety, happiness, or success, yet life constantly reminds us that there are forces beyond our control. When we cling too tightly, we create tension in our hearts and minds. We grow anxious when things do not go as we expect. We grow frustrated when results are delayed. But God never intended for His children to live in constant stress. Surrender is not a sign of weakness. It is the gateway to experiencing miracles that defy human logic. Trying to control everything keeps us trapped in fear because control is always limited. We can only manage so much. We can only predict so much. And when life refuses to cooperate, our fear magnifies. But when we choose to let go, we release the heavy burden of trying to carry the impossible ourselves. Letting go does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means placing trust in the one who is capable of handling what we cannot. It means acknowledging that our small human perspective cannot see the full picture, but God sees the beginning, the end, and every moment in between. Too often, people wait to surrender until they feel ready, until the path seems clear, or until the outcome seems favorable. But surrender must happen in the midst of uncertainty, not after certainty. The very act of letting go in the storm is what allows God's presence to be fully revealed. When we insist on controlling the timing, the method, and the solution, we block ourselves from the ways God can work most powerfully. The most extraordinary answers often come when our hands are open and our hearts are willing. Letting go transforms the way we approach prayer, faith, and expectation. Prayer ceases to be a checklist of demands and becomes a dialogue of trust. Faith ceases to be a fragile hope and becomes a confident posture of the soul. Expectation ceases to be rigid and becomes flexible, ready to receive solutions that may arrive in forms we did not imagine. God does not operate on human schedules, and He does not limit His methods to what seems logical. By surrendering, we make room for divine possibilities, and we step into a space where what seemed impossible can become inevitable. Many people misunderstand surrender. They think surrender is passive, as though faith is doing nothing. But surrender is active. It requires courage. It requires persistence. It requires the decision to repeatedly release anxiety, to repeatedly choose trust over fear, and to repeatedly hand over what we cannot handle. Every time we let go, we strengthen our spiritual muscles. Every time we release control, we make space for God to act. Every time we choose trust over panic, we participate in the miracle of transformation, not just in circumstances, but in our hearts. The process of letting go also reveals something profound about our relationship with God. When we hold tightly to outcomes, we act as though we do not trust His wisdom, as though our understanding is superior to His plan. But when we release control, we acknowledge His sovereignty. We declare with our actions, not just words, that God is greater than our fears, more capable than our limitations, and more faithful than our doubts. Surrender is not the absence of effort. It is the presence of trust, working alongside our diligence but not confined by it. It is in the act of letting go that miracles begin to take shape, not necessarily in the way we expect, but in the way God knows is best. When we insist on our way, we limit the miraculous to human imagination. When we let go, we open ourselves to divine creativity. God can arrange circumstances, hearts, and timing in ways that no one can anticipate. The moment we stop trying to force outcomes is the moment we step into a reality governed by divine orchestration rather than human anxiety. Letting go is also an act of faith that transforms our inner life. When we cling, our thoughts tighten, our emotions fluctuate, and our body carries tension. But when we surrender, peace flows in. Anxiety loses its grip. Our spirit rests. We discover a quiet confidence that is not dependent on external results. This inner peace is itself a miracle, and it strengthens us to face challenges with clarity, courage, and calm. The more we practice surrender, the more natural it becomes. The more natural it becomes, the more deeply we experience the presence of God working on our behalf. Many of the most powerful stories of faith are not about people who controlled every detail. They are about people who released their fears and trusted God completely. They stepped forward in faith, uncertain of the outcome, yet confident in the character of the one who holds all outcomes. They found that letting go is not giving up. It is stepping into a greater reality where human limitation is replaced by divine provision, and anxiety is replaced by peace that surpasses understanding. Surrender also has the effect of sharpening our awareness of God's hand at work. When we stop controlling and start observing, we begin to notice small movements of grace we would have overlooked. Doors that seem closed begin to open. Relationships that seemed broken begin to heal. Opportunities that seemed impossible begin to appear. Our eyes are trained to see the miraculous in the everyday, and our hearts learn to respond with gratitude rather than fear. And perhaps most importantly, letting go deepens our intimacy with God. It is in the release that we experience His presence most vividly. The heart that is open and unguarded can receive guidance, comfort, and provision in ways that the anxious heart cannot. The soul that stops trying to manipulate circumstances can hear the whispers of wisdom, the nudges of courage, and the assurances of love that carry it through life's storms. Surrender is not only about outcomes, it is about transformation. So when worry tells you to hold tighter, when fear urges you to control, when doubt convinces you that only your hands can fix what is broken, remember that miracles require open hands and surrendered hearts. Trust is not passive, it is the courageous choice to let go and let God. And in that surrender, the impossible begins to bend toward the possible, not because of your strength, but because of His. The moment you release your grip on the uncontrollable, you make room for God to work. And in that space, the extraordinary is made real. There comes a moment in the life of every believer when we must stop waiting for proof and start living as though God is already at work. Too often we look for evidence, signs, or guarantees before we dare to trust fully, and in doing so, we place our faith in circumstances rather than in the character of God. But God does not wait for us to see Him in order to act. He waits for us to believe in Him enough to step forward. The moment you stop asking for evidence and start living in alignment with trust, you begin to embody the reality that faith was always meant to produce. Living as though God is already moving transforms not only your perspective, but your entire being. Becoming the person who trusts God completely begins with your thoughts. Your mind is the soil in which either faith or fear will grow. If you constantly rehearse doubt, you plant seeds of anxiety that bear fruit in worry and hesitation. But if you feed your mind with truth, if you remind yourself daily that God is greater than your obstacles, your inner landscape begins to shift. Belief and expectation are not abstract ideas. They are living forces that shape behavior, decisions, and outcomes. When your thoughts align with trust, your heart and your actions follow naturally. Trusting God fully also requires courage. It is easy to speak faith in comfortable circumstances, but to act in faith when the outcome is uncertain takes boldness. To step into situations without seeing the whole path is to live in divine partnership rather than human limitation. When you adopt this posture, you stop measuring your steps by fear and begin measuring them by God's promise. You carry yourself differently. You speak differently. You act differently. You stop reacting to problems and begin responding to possibilities. One of the most profound aspects of trust is its ability to change your relationship with time. Many of us live with a constant sense of urgency, as if God is running late or as if life's clock dictates His power. But when you live as a person who trusts completely, you no longer live by the stopwatch of anxiety. You understand that God's timing is perfect and that waiting is not wasted. It is preparation. Waiting refines faith. Waiting deepens character. Waiting positions you to receive what could never have come in haste. The person who trusts does not see delay as denial, but as a space in which God is quietly arranging His best. Trust also reshapes your expectations. When you are fully anchored in faith, you no longer cling to a limited vision of what is possible. You open your mind to outcomes that surpass human imagination. Where fear imagines scarcity, trust imagines abundance. Where doubt imagines failure, trust imagines victory. And the incredible truth is that this shift in expectation often changes what actually unfolds in life. The heart that expects God's provision begins to recognize it when it appears, and often it appears in ways far more extraordinary than the mind could have devised. Living as a person who trusts God completely also requires consistent practice. Trust is not a one-time decision. It is a daily posture. There will be mornings when fear rises like a wave, evenings when anxiety whispers that all is lost, and moments when circumstances appear overwhelming. Yet, trust is a choice you make again.